Mars had always been a dream for humanity, a new frontier in the stars. For generations, Earth's most brilliant minds worked tirelessly to make the red planet habitable, creating sprawling colonies and thriving settlements. Mars became a beacon of human achievement, a symbol of Earth's technological might and ambition. But beneath the surface, a tension was building. The Martian settlers, many born on the planet, began to grow restless. Their entire lives had been shaped by Earth's control, its military presence, its economy, and its politics. The Martians were increasingly tired of living in Earth's shadow, and they began to demand their independence. Commander Sarah Hayes had been assigned to Mars to oversee Earth's operations, both civilian and military. She was a seasoned officer, someone who had always followed orders without question. Her loyalty to Earth was unwavering, and she viewed her role as critical in maintaining peace on Mars. But as she walked through the sprawling city of New Horizon, Earth's largest colony on Mars, she couldn't ignore the unease that seemed to permeate the atmosphere. "Captain, the report from the Martian government is in," said Lieutenant Joshua Pierce, Sarah's second-in-command. His voice was tight, his expression serious as he handed her the data pad. Sarah glanced at the screen. The Martians had sent another request for more autonomy. The request was polite, but it was clear what they were asking. They wanted more control over their own resources, more say in their government, and an end to Earth's dominance. "They're pushing for more autonomy again," Sarah said, her voice heavy with concern. She paused for a moment before adding, "It's only a matter of time before things escalate." Joshua nodded. "I've been hearing rumors from the locals. They're getting more vocal. It's not just the Martian government anymore. There's talk of rebellion." Sarah rubbed her temple, her mind racing. A rebellion on Mars? The idea seemed far-fetched. But as the days passed and more whispers of unrest spread, Sarah began to wonder if this was something she would have to face head-on. Life on Mars. Earth's dominance. Mars had been Earth's lifeline for decades. The planet's resources were invaluable: minerals, water, and a wealth of untapped energy sources. Earth had long used Mars as a colony for mining operations and military bases, and in return, the Martians had been provided with a somewhat comfortable life. But the price of that comfort was steep. Earth controlled Mars's economy, its infrastructure, and even its government. The Martians were not without resentment. They had long been treated as second-class citizens, subjugated to Earth's will and forced to follow orders without any meaningful say in their future. The Red Sun, a growing Martian nationalist group, had risen from the ashes of dissatisfaction, calling for Martian independence and the end of Earth's occupation. The Red Sun's leader, Rylan Cade, was becoming a household name in Martian cities. He spoke passionately about Martian sovereignty and independence from Earth's rule. His message resonated with many Martians, especially the younger generation, who had grown up under Earth's oppressive regime. It wasn't long before the Red Sun's influence spread to Mars mining colonies, and whispers of revolution began to echo through the streets. Sarah knew that the situation was delicate. Earth's military presence on Mars was vast, but the Martians had something that Earth's forces could never truly control: the planet itself. Mars had a vast, harsh terrain, and its rugged environment gave the Martians an advantage. The longer the tensions festered, the more likely they were to erupt into violence. Commander Sarah Hayes, a loyal officer. Sarah Hayes had been raised to serve Earth. Her family had a long history of military service, and her own career had been nothing short of exemplary. She had been selected for her position on Mars because of her loyalty and her ability to maintain order. She was known for her strict adherence to protocols and her unwavering commitment to Earth's interests. But Sarah had never questioned the system, until now. Mars was no longer just a colony. It had become a symbol of oppression, a constant reminder of Earth's power and control. And as Sarah walked through the busy streets of New Horizon, she saw the Martians growing bolder. Their protests were becoming more frequent, more organized. The Martian workers, who had long been the backbone of the colony, were beginning to rise up against the system that had kept them under Earth's thumb. "Captain, we've received a request from the Red Sun," Joshua said, interrupting Sarah's thoughts. She turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "A request?" He handed her another data pad. "It's a call for negotiations. They want to meet with Earth officials." Sarah took the pad and scanned the message. The Red Sun had finally made an official move, asking for a meeting with Earth's leaders to discuss Martian autonomy. Sarah knew this was a critical moment. If Earth ignored the Red Sun's demands, it could ignite a spark that would turn into a full-fledged rebellion. But if they gave in, it might signal weakness and encourage further unrest. "Do we respond?" Joshua asked, his voice filled with apprehension. Sarah took a deep breath and considered her options. "We respond, but we set the terms. Earth won't give up Mars, not without a fight." The tensions rise. As Sarah and Joshua continued to review the reports, the city of New Horizon became the focal point of the growing unrest. The protests that had started as small, peaceful gatherings quickly escalated into violent clashes between Martian workers and Earth's security forces. In one such confrontation, a group of Martian miners attempted to stage a sit-in at one of Earth's key facilities. The Earth forces, under orders to maintain control, responded with force. Riot. Shields and gas canisters were deployed, and the situation quickly spiraled into chaos. The Martians fought back with improvised weapons, their anger and frustration spilling over into violent resistance. Sarah was called to the scene to oversee the response. As she arrived at the site, she saw the aftermath of the confrontation: injured Martians, broken equipment, and the stench of smoke and fire hanging in the air. Her heart sank as she realized that this was no longer just a minor disturbance. This was the beginning of something much larger. "Captain," a young officer called out as she stepped out of her transport, "the situation is escalating. We've lost control of the eastern sector." Sarah surveyed the scene, her mind racing. "We can't let this spread. We need to contain it. If this gets out of hand, it could turn into a full-scale rebellion." As she gave orders to tighten security and lock down key areas of the city, Sarah couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The Martians were no longer just protesting. They were fighting for something more. They were fighting for their freedom. The Red Sun's influence. The Red Sun had not been idle in the face of Earth's increasing control over Mars. Ryland Cade and his followers had been organizing in secret, laying the groundwork for the revolution. The organization's message was simple: Mars belonged to the Martians and Earth had no right to dictate their future. Sarah had heard rumors of Ryland's charismatic speeches and his growing influence, but she had never taken him seriously. He was just one voice among many, she had told herself. But as she watched the violence spread through the streets of New Horizon, it became clear that Ryland's message had struck a chord with the Martian people. And now the entire planet was on the brink of open rebellion. As the days passed, more and more Martian workers joined the protests, and the calls for independence grew louder. The Martian government, long under Earth's thumb, had begun to show cracks. Some Martian leaders, frustrated by Earth's refusal to negotiate, had begun to secretly support the Red Sun's cause. Sarah had tried to maintain order, but the task was becoming more difficult by the day. The Martians no longer trusted Earth's intentions, and the security forces were stretched thin. If something wasn't done soon, the unrest would spread beyond control. A brewing storm by the end of the week, Sarah knew that the situation was no longer manageable. The Red Sun had taken their demands to the next level, and Mars was on the edge of rebellion. With every passing hour, the risk of full-scale war grew larger. As she stood in her office overlooking the Martian landscape, Sarah felt a wave of doubt wash over her. She had always believed in Earth's mission to bring stability to Mars. But now she wasn't so sure. The Martians were fighting for something real, something they had long been denied. And she couldn't help but wonder if Earth's occupation of Mars had gone too far. The calm before the storm was ending. War was coming, and Sarah was caught in the middle of a conflict that would determine the future of Mars and its people. The Martian protests and unrest, the once quiet streets of New Horizon, Mars' largest colony, had become a battleground. What started as small protests over labor conditions, wages, and rights had evolved into something much larger. The Martian people were no longer simply demanding fair treatment. They were calling for independence, and they were willing to fight for it. Sarah Hayes stood on the observation deck of Earth's command center, looking out over the sprawling colony below. The Martian landscape was rugged and beautiful, but beneath its beauty something darker was unfolding. The protests had begun peacefully, with Martian workers gathering in the streets to voice their frustrations. However, Earth's military presence, which had been a constant on Mars for decades, responded with force. Riot police were deployed to quell the unrest, and security forces began rounding up the protesters. It was supposed to be a show of control, a message to the Martians that their dissent would not be tolerated. But instead it had ignited something much bigger, a spark of rebellion. Sarah had read the reports, watched the footage, and felt the tension growing, but nothing had prepared her for what she was seeing now. The streets of New Horizon were in chaos. Protesters were clashing with security forces. Barricades were being set up in every district, and violence was escalating by the hour. "Captain Hayes," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Lieutenant Joshua Pierce, her second in command. He was standing behind her, his face grim. "The situation is getting worse. The protests are spreading to other colonies. We're losing control." Sarah turned to face him, her expression hardening. "How bad is it?" Joshua handed her a tablet with an updated report. "More than 50,000 people are involved in the protests across Mars. Earth's security forces are overwhelmed. We're running out of resources to contain this. If we don't act soon, it could escalate into a full-blown rebellion." Sarah's mind raced. The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. The Martian settlers were no longer content with small concessions. They were demanding their freedom. And if Earth didn't respond carefully, Mars could be lost forever. "We can't keep responding with force," Sarah said, her voice cold with realization. "If we push them any further, we'll be at war." Ryland Cade and the Red Sun movement, Sarah, knew that the Martian protests weren't just random acts of defiance. There was an organized force behind them, the Red Sun. Led by Ryland Cade, a former Martian miner turned revolutionary, the group had gained significant influence in recent months. Ryland's speeches, broadcast through underground channels, had become the rallying cry for Martians who felt oppressed and marginalized by Earth's rule. Ryland Cade was a charismatic leader, and his message had struck a chord with the Martians. "We are Martians, not Earthlings," his voice echoed in the minds of millions, "and it is time for us to take our future into our own hands." The Red Sun was a movement of resistance, a group that refused to be pushed aside by Earth's colonial rule. While Earth's military was strong and well-equipped, the Martians had something more. The land they had lived on for centuries, their connection to the planet, and their unyielding desire for independence. Sarah had seen Ryland Cade's name appear in the reports and heard whispers about him in the corridors of Earth's military base. She had always dismissed him as just another radical, another extremist who wanted to burn down everything Earth had built. But the protests were no longer just about a few disgruntled workers. They were about the very soul of Mars. And Ryland Cade had become the face of that fight. The Red Sun's message was simple but powerful. Mars was for the Martians. Earth had no right to control them any longer. And the more Earth cracked down, the more support Cade's movement gained. Sarah's inner conflict as the protests grew larger and more violent. Sarah felt the weight of her orders pressing down on her. She had always believed in Earth's mission to bring order and stability to Mars, but as the situation worsened, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The Martians had been living under Earth's control for decades, but at what cost? The protests weren't just about better wages or more rights. They were about something deeper: identity. Mars was a world of its own now, and the Martians were beginning to question whether they should be controlled by Earth at all. The uprising wasn't just an economic issue, it was a political one. The Martians wanted independence, and Sarah realized reluctantly that Earth's hold on the planet was slipping. One evening, after a particularly brutal clash between Earth's forces and Martian protesters, Sarah found herself alone in her office, reviewing reports. The damage from the riots was substantial, and many Martians had been injured or killed. As she sifted through the data, she saw an image of a young Martian girl, barely 16, who had been shot during a protest. Her eyes stared up at Sarah, and something inside her cracked. "These people are dying," Sarah whispered to herself. And for what? She knew she couldn't keep fighting this war blindly, especially after seeing the toll it was taking on the Martian people. She had always believed in Earth's mission, but now she was faced with the uncomfortable truth. Mars was not Earth's to control. The Martians had every right to fight for their freedom, but the question remained: could she stand by and watch as Mars fell into anarchy? Could she abandon her loyalty to Earth? Was there another way? The Martian government's response back on Mars: the Martian government had been struggling to maintain control. While some leaders were still loyal to Earth, many were growing sympathetic to the Red Sun's cause. Martian leaders like Governor Helena Knox had been pressured to make a choice: support Earth's military intervention or support the Martian cause. Governor Knox, a pragmatic leader, had been caught in the middle of the power conflict. She understood the Martian desire for independence, but she also knew that Mars needed Earth's support to survive. Without Earth's resources and technology, Mars could not thrive. However, as the protests escalated and the Red Sun gained more influence, Knox found herself increasingly isolated from Earth. "I didn't sign up for this," Governor Knox said, looking over the reports of the escalating violence in her office. "I didn't sign up to see Mars tear itself apart." Her advisor, Colonel Rennar, stood beside her, his arms crossed. "The Martians won't be satisfied with anything less than independence, Governor. Earth's grip on this planet is weakening. They're calling for a new government, one that reflects the will of the people." "I know," Knox replied, her voice heavy. "But independence comes at a cost, and I fear we won't survive it." Knox was torn. On one hand, she had always been loyal to Earth and had worked to maintain peace. On the other hand, she knew that the Martian people were demanding something more. A new chapter for Mars was beginning, and Knox was unsure which side she should be on. The first major skirmish. The tension reached its boiling point when the first major skirmish broke out between Earth security forces and the Martian protesters. The protests had escalated from peaceful sit-ins to violent clashes as Martian workers, fed up with Earth's oppressive control, fought back. Earth's military, under Sarah's command, had been ordered to restore order by any means necessary. Theory: Earth forces moved in with armored vehicles, riot squads, and tear gas. The Martians fought back with improvised weapons, using the terrain of Mars to their advantage. It was clear that this was no longer just a protest. It was a full-scale battle for the future of Mars. Sarah led the Earth forces into the heart of the conflict, hoping to quell the violence quickly. But as the firefights intensified and Earth soldiers clashed with Martian workers in the streets, she realized that this was more than just a fight for control. This was a battle for identity, for freedom. The Martians were no longer willing to remain Earth subordinates. In the chaos, Rylan Cade appeared. The leader of the Red Sun, surrounded by his followers, emerged in the middle of the battle, rallying the Martians to fight for their right to control their own future. His words cut through the noise of the battle, igniting the spark that would fuel the rebellion. "Fight for Mars," Rylan shouted. "This is our planet. This is our time. Earth will fall." Sarah watched as Rylan's words resonated with the Martians, fueling their resolve. She knew the battle was far from over. The Martians had awakened, and now they were fighting back with everything they had. Escalation and realization. By the end of the day, the battle was over, but the war had just begun. Earth's forces had won the skirmish, but at a heavy cost. Hundreds of Martians had been injured or killed, and the protests had only intensified. The Martians were no longer content to sit in silence. They had fought for their rights, and now they were ready to fight for their freedom. Sarah stood at the command center, watching as the reports flooded in. The casualties were high, and she could see the anger in the faces of the Martian people. They weren't going to back down. "They're ready to fight," Joshua said quietly, his eyes grim. "And I don't think we can stop them now." Sarah clenched her fists, her heart heavy with the weight of what was happening. She had always believed in Earth's mission, but now she wasn't so sure. The Martians were fighting for something real, something important. And as Sarah looked at the chaos unfolding around her, she knew one thing for certain: Mars would never be the same. The Martian counteroffensive. The dust had barely settled from the initial clashes when Earth's military command ordered a full-scale response to the growing Martian rebellion. The first skirmish had shown just how fierce the Martian resistance was, and now Earth's political leaders were determined to crush the Red Sun and its supporters before the rebellion could spread further. Commander Sarah Hayes, still in shock from the earlier events, received the orders late one night. The tone of the message from Earth Central Command was clear. Mars could not be allowed to slip from their grasp. "Commander Hayes, this is a direct order from Earth Command." The voice on the other end of the communication system crackled. "We've already lost ground. You are to mobilize all available forces and lead a retaliatory strike. We cannot allow Mars to fall into chaos." Sarah looked out over the Martian city from her command center, the quiet red landscape stretching out before her. The planet was both beautiful and unforgiving, a perfect reflection of the struggle it was about to endure. "Understood, Earth Command," Sarah replied, her voice a mixture of determination and reluctance. She had long been loyal to Earth's mission, but after what she had witnessed in the streets of New Horizon, she felt the weight of the decision bearing down on her. This wouldn't just be another battle. This was the beginning of an all-out war. As she closed the transmission, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if this conflict could have been avoided. Could Earth have given the Martians a voice before it reached this point? Could the violence have been stopped? But there was no time to dwell on those questions now. The rebellion had already begun, and Earth's military might was about to descend upon Mars like a storm, mobilizing Earth's forces. The response was swift. Earth's military presence on Mars, already large, was quickly bolstered by additional reinforcements sent from Earth. In a matter of days, heavily armed units arrived, along with ground vehicles and aerial combat drones, ready to reassert Earth's control. The Martian settlers, however, had proven that they were not to be intimidated. The rebellion was no longer just about workers fighting for rights. It was now a war for the future of Mars itself. Sarah was placed in charge of leading the strike against the heart of the Red Sun's operations. Earth's military had devised a plan to hit the rebellion where it would hurt the most: Martian military bases and key supply lines. It was a strategy designed to cripple the rebellion and send a clear message to Ryland Cade and his followers. Earth would not yield. In the days leading up to the strike, Sarah couldn't escape the mounting sense of dread she felt. The Martians were more organized than anyone had realized. Their attacks had been swift and strategic, using Mars's harsh terrain to their advantage. If Earth wanted to stop them, it would need to act quickly and decisively. Sarah spent her nights planning, with her top officers, finalizing the details of the operation. "We hit their supply depots, disrupt their communication systems, and take control of their military facilities," she said, her voice sharp with authority. "We can't allow them to regroup." Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Joshua Pierce, was quick to offer his advice. "Captain, the Martians have had time to prepare. They'll be expecting an attack. We need to be ready for an ambush. If they know we're coming, it could cost us everything." Sarah nodded. "We'll take a covert approach. We move fast, strike hard, and then get out before they can retaliate." The mission was a high-risk operation. If it failed, the Martians would gain the upper hand, and Earth's military presence on Mars could collapse. But if they succeeded, they could cripple the rebellion and send the message that Earth's control was absolute. The first assault. The battle for the base. The attack began under the cover of darkness. Earth's forces had established a foothold near a key Martian military base. The plan was simple: move in, seize control of the base, and destroy their communication systems to prevent the Martian rebels from calling reinforcements. Sarah and her team led the charge, their boots crunching through the red dust of Mars. As the Earth forces advanced, the tension in the air was palpable. The Martians, however, were ready. They had anticipated Earth's move and set up their defenses accordingly. The Earth forces had barely made it to the outer walls of the base when the first wave of Martian artillery rained down on them, forcing them to take cover. "Incoming," Joshua shouted as the explosions rocked the ground beneath them. Sarah quickly ordered her troops to fall back behind the cover of the rocky terrain. The Martians had set up barricades, making it difficult for Earth's forces to advance. "We've got to push forward," Sarah said, trying to remain calm. "The mission depends on it." Earth's forces pressed on, moving through the heavy fire. The battle raged for hours, with both sides taking casualties. Despite Earth's superior firepower, the Martian rebels held their ground. The base was heavily fortified, and the Martians used the natural features of the landscape to their advantage, laying traps and ambushing Earth's soldiers at every turn. Sarah's unit was pushed back several times, but each time, they regrouped and advanced. She could feel the weight of every decision. This was not just a battle. It was a statement. If Earth failed to reclaim Mars, the entire colony could slip into the hands of the Martians. As the hours passed, Sarah's team finally made it to the heart of the base. The Martians fought fiercely, but their resistance was weakening. The Earth forces were overwhelming them, and they had almost reached the communications room. But just as Sarah thought victory was within their grasp, an unexpected turn of events occurred. The Martians detonated an explosive device, taking out part of the base's infrastructure. The explosion shook the ground, knocking Sarah and her officers to the ground. "Captain," Joshua shouted as he crawled over to her. "We've lost the base. We need to retreat." Sarah's heart raced. The mission was failing. She had to make a decision. The Martians were fighting harder than ever, and their resistance was stronger than Earth had predicted. "Fall back," Sarah ordered. We need to regroup. We'll fight another day. Retreat and reflection. The Earth forces were forced to retreat from the base, leaving behind heavy equipment and valuable supplies. The Martians had won this round, and the strike had failed. Sarah stood at the edge of the battlefield watching as her forces withdrew. The damage was done, and she couldn't shake the sense that something had shifted. "We underestimated them," Sarah muttered under her breath. "The Martians are stronger than we thought." Joshua came up beside her, his face grim. "They've learned to fight for their survival. We can't keep underestimating them, Captain." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. She had always believed in Earth's superiority, in its military power, but now she was forced to confront the reality. Mars was no longer Earth's playground. The Martians were fighting not just for survival, but for their freedom. The Martian rebellion had gone from a series of protests to a full-scale war. Earth's forces had failed in their first major assault, and the Martians were only growing stronger. It was clear now. Earth had underestimated the Martian resolve. Internal conflict and loyalty as the resistance continued to grow. Sarah's thoughts became increasingly conflicted. She had always followed orders without question, but now she found herself wondering if Earth's mission on Mars was truly just. The Martians weren't the enemy. They were fighting for their freedom, their right to self-determination. And as Sarah watched her forces retreat from the battlefield, the full scope of the rebellion's cause began to weigh heavily on her. She had always believed that Earth was justified in its control over Mars. The resources, the power, the technology, Earth needed Mars to secure its future. But the Martians didn't see it that way. They had lived on Mars for generations, and they wanted control of their own fate. The war was no longer just about power. It was about identity. The Martians weren't fighting Earth's military. They were fighting for their freedom. Sarah knew that a decision was coming, one that would force her to choose between loyalty to Earth and her growing sympathy for the Martian cause. Martian resilience. After the failure of Earth's first major assault, the Martian resistance, led by the Red Sun and its charismatic leader Rylan Cade, began to regroup and strengthen its position. The Martians were not just fighting to defend their land. They were fighting for their very survival. What had begun as a rebellion sparked by economic disparity and political oppression had now transformed into an unrelenting struggle for independence. Sarah Hayes, still reeling from the failure of the mission, sat alone in her office aboard Earth's command station. Her thoughts swirled around the events that had unfolded over the past few weeks. The Martians had shown remarkable resilience, and it was becoming clear that Earth's military might was not enough to keep the rebellion under control. Sarah's communications officer, Lieutenant Joshua Pierce, entered her office with a fresh set of reports. His face was drawn, his usually calm demeanor replaced by worry. "Captain, the Martians are regrouping," he said, his voice tense. "Their strikes are getting more coordinated. They've learned from our attack, and they're planning a counteroffensive. We've received intelligence that they're preparing for something big." Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of her position more than ever. "They've already taken back significant territory, haven't they?" "Yes, and their support is only growing. The Red Sun's influence has spread across Mars. It's not just the workers now, they're getting support from entire settlements." Sarah stared at the holographic map of Mars that flickered in front of her. The Martians were everywhere now, their presence undeniable. The Earth military's hold on the planet was weakening, and it seemed only a matter of time before the entire Martian colony would fall under their control. If Earth did not act quickly, Mars would be lost forever. "We need to hit them hard before they can strike back," Sarah said, her voice filled with resolve. "We need to cripple their supply lines and take out their communication hubs. We can't let them build momentum." Joshua nodded but didn't look convinced. "It may be too late for that. They've already taken control of key resources, and they're gaining allies among Mars' civilian population. If we push too hard, we risk alienating the very people we're trying to protect. Sarah glanced at the map again. The Martians were no longer just rebels. They were a unified force with a clear vision for the future. And as much as Sarah hated to admit it, Earth's role in Mars's past had been a source of the very anger fueling the rebellion. "We don't have a choice," Sarah replied, her tone firm. "Mars is too important. We need to bring the rebellion to its knees before they take everything." Rylan Cade. The face of the revolution, Rylan Cade, the leader of the Red Sun, had become a symbol of Martian resistance. What started as a small group of miners and workers fighting for better conditions had grown into a powerful force that was threatening to overthrow Earth's control of the entire planet. Rylan's passion for the cause and his ability to unite the Martian people had made him a legend. Sarah had heard the rumors about Rylan, how he had once been a miner, how his fiery speeches inspired millions of Martians to join his cause. She had seen his broadcasts, where he called for Martian sovereignty, rejecting Earth's rule. He was a man who had seen the injustices firsthand and was determined to put an end to them. Now Rylan was leading his forces from the heart of Mars. His command center, hidden in the rugged Martian hills, was a symbol of resistance, a place where Martian leaders and fighters came together to plan the next phase of their rebellion. "We will no longer live under the shadow of Earth's tyranny," Rylan's voice echoed through a secret transmission, his words passionate and filled with conviction. "This is Mars's time, and we will fight for it." In the underground resistance headquarters, Rylan stood before his closest advisors, his eyes burning with resolve. "We've taken back the mining colonies. We've crippled their communications. And now, we strike at the heart of Earth's presence on Mars. If we can hit Phobos, we'll break their hold on the planet once and for all." His advisor, Commander Elise Carter, nodded. "We have the support of the colonies. They're ready. Earth won't be able to stop us." Rylan clenched his fists. "We will push them back. No more Earth control. Mars belongs to us."